And now for the panel. So today we've got two great speakers on the topic of tips and tricks from ex-Salesforce execs. I'm going to quickly run through their bios, just share a bit of information about them, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So first and foremost, we have Paul Snelson on everyone's right. Thank you, Paul. Paul is an executive leader in building and driving rapid customer and revenue growth for tech companies, specifically in software and SaaS marketplaces. With over 20 years of sales experience, he's delivered measurable results for both small companies and large companies. Prior to joining TouchBistro, he was VP of Commercial Sales at Salesforce. And as VP of Sales, he is involved in both driving the sales strategy and execution while leading sales teams across the country. We'll talk about what the hell that means. Then we've got David. David's a scientist turned four-time tech entrepreneur. Currently, he's the VP of Sales at Influitive. Previously, David was a VP Commercial Sales and Resident Sales Leader Evangelist. We'll also talk about what the heck that means. At Salesforce, having joined via the acquisition of Ripple.com, where he was one of the founding members and VP of Sales. Prior to that, he served as Sales Ops Director at Verisant and previously at WorkBrain. So, long history of tech companies, specifically startups with you, David. First and foremost, icebreaker, sales isn't necessarily taught in school, David. How has studying science helped you in sales?
Yeah, hot mic. It's a good question. I mean, as a kid, I was always one of those kids that like to take apart the vacuum cleaner just to kind of see how it worked and try to put it back together. And I found that as I kind of got into the startup scene, which was kind of by accident. I mean, most people don't tend to get into sales because they took it in university and then kind of adopted it as a vocation. So I kind of just got into it a little bit by accident. I realized that sales is actually like a vacuum cleaner that you can take apart and figure out how it works. And so I found that the science background really helped in terms of building processes or understanding metrics, trying to figure out why things happened the way they did. And then as it turned out, I actually got deeper into that when it came to things like sales psychology and negotiation and emotional intelligence, because it's all kind of on the same spectrum of trying to see the world of sales like a system that you can figure out kind of the levers and knobs, almost like the Matrix. It's the brand promise we talk about to our teams, which is you come in and the world of sales is kind of like the Matrix, but all screwed up. And then at the end of the Matrix, when I know Matrix is like a 20-year-old movie now, and some people don't know what I'm talking about, but at the end of the Matrix, you've seen the Matrix? Okay, good. At the end of the Matrix, when Keanu Reeves sees it's not ones and zeros and it's shapes and outlines, that's kind of the way you want to think of sales. It's a system that as you kind of work through it, you can see. So that's how the background in science helped.
So if large organizations like Salesforce are the red pill, startups are the blue pill, you've now taken the blue pill. Why did you decide to go down that rabbit hole?
You mean the startup rabbit hole?
Yeah, blue pill.
Yeah, so I had an awesome run at Salesforce, and I can't say enough about it considering I got into it by accident. I didn't choose to get into it. But I don't know, I love figuring things out. And it's not that there's not a lot of things to figure out at Salesforce, but I find in the startup world there's just a wider variety of things you need to figure out. And quite honestly, the cost of failure is higher. And if you're, I don't know, it's like a little bit, you're asking for punishment. But if you like that, if you like when the cost of failure is high, then it becomes almost addictive. It's almost like you're a thrill seeker, but in the sales world. And it's not that, again, there's not enough to figure out at Salesforce, but it gets to a point where the company is really, really big. Whether I succeed or fail, Salesforce will be just fine. But in the startup world, the cost of failure is really high, so it actually forces you to figure things out. And when you figure things out on your own, you actually grow a lot more. And I love to learn. And so I find that startups are kind of like the addictive blue pill of learning.
Their stock's done pretty nicely since you left, about a year and a half ago.
Because I left.
Paul, let's jump with you. You joined TouchBistro, I think it's about a year and a half now. When you joined, just for context, there was about 7 to 8 reps. It's been a year and a half later, closing in on 50 reps, if I'm not mistaken. What was the reason for jumping ship at Salesforce and joining TouchBistro a year and a half ago?
So when I joined Salesforce, I was at Salesforce for 9 years, and I didn't think I would be there for that long, quite honestly. I joined Salesforce because I got tired of working for shitty software companies. And I realized that I was very young in my sales career, I think at that time, and what I realized was that there was a lot of things that would prevent me from being successful. And Salesforce was the opportunity for me to go and prove that I was as good as I maybe thought that I was. Whereas, in startup software companies, there's a lot of reasons why you can't be successful, and it's not necessarily all with you. So what I didn't realize is early on that it would be there for so long, but also that I would just go right back to the startup world. And it was a leadership course that I was fortunate enough to take at Salesforce, and they provided a coach after the fact to kind of go through the results. And it was one of those questionnaires that you answer of like, well, it assesses risk tolerance, and would you do this or would you do that? And so I answered the questions the way that I felt I should answer them. But when the coach reviewed the results with me after, and I said, I really wanted to answer it this way, and I really wanted to answer it this way, and he's like, well, there's a good chance that you're at Salesforce because at the time of your life you need financial stability and all of those other types of things. But when you reach that financial independence, which I still am waiting for, but you'll go back to the startup world. So it was an opportunity now to take everything I learned at Salesforce and before and apply it from the ground up. There were 7 people, maybe 8 people at TouchBistro, but we've had to kind of recreate the sales organization and build it from the ground up, which is extremely rewarding.
We'll come back to that in a moment, but I want to discuss something specifically about Salesforce, or maybe even larger organizations, is that VPs typically don't come in at a VP level in Salesforce. I think that's a bit of an anomaly in your case, Priemer. Can you give us, can you round that idea out for us, Paul, around what's the path going from an AE to a VP, and do you think that's necessary? Do you think that people can join Salesforce at that higher level without the context or the background that comes with working your way up the ranks? Because I know David does have an opinion on that, and some of the the flaws that come with that as well.
So I think that for me, I was an individual contributor, joined Salesforce as an individual contributor, but with the vision of becoming a manager. And I think that there are certainly opportunities to join Salesforce as a VP, coming in at a VP level. But I think the bar keeps going up in terms of the amount of experience, the amount of value that you're going to bring to the table. And I think depending on where people are with their level of experience, I think it'll be different in every case. I think one thing that Salesforce is really good at, and we did it all the time, was you're interviewing somebody for kind of the position here, but you hire them here. And so our best source of candidate leads came from the mid-market department at Salesforce because they were getting pushed down.
What do you think about that, David? Joining in as a VP, someone who didn't necessarily go through the ranks, what was that experience like? Do you think there were things that you missed?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's also different because you're coming from the outside via an acquisition. So it's kind of like, imagine you went to some small town high school in Northern Ontario, and then you got transferred, to the University of Toronto with 50,000 students, and none of the rooms had like names or numbers on them. So you're like, okay, I get that there's learning that happens here, like back home. But how is it actually going to kind of manifest? Who do I need to talk to? So as a leader, you're kind of thrust into this situation where you don't have the background. You're trying to figure out how to do the job that you did just yesterday with your other team at a different company, now transposed into this new organization. And a lot of it is, you have to make friends, and you kind of need almost like a Sherpa to kind of help you along and show you, how not to get beat up in the hallways and where the lunchroom is and all that kind of stuff. So I feel like we kind of missed that, and it actually did take. It took some time. Like imagine, the school analogy is a good one. Like you just get transferred to this new school and you got to kind of figure it out. And when you figure it out, when you figure out the matrix, as it were, of Salesforce, then, things actually move along a lot better. But kind of not having, not even just, coming in as a VP, but just coming in cold to a whole environment. You're coming in, you're kind of coming into for like third year university, where like the students had been there already and they know where all the classrooms are. And so it was adjustment for sure.
One of the things that I know a lot of younger salespeople struggle with in their career, and I've gone through this as well, is the prospect of joining a larger sales organization, i.e. Salesforce, or going the startup route where you may have the potential to work for someone like one of yourselves, gather the experience and kind of hack that process together. What do you recommend for people in the audience who, maybe a few years into their careers, they have the option to join a larger corporation nowadays or continue down the startup path? What would you have done yourself, knowing what you know now?
Startup path, absolutely. I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm the glutton for punishment, but I feel that being thrust into the bear pit with people that you know and like and are keen to learn with is a great way of building your career. I feel like there's a lot of lessons learned that I for sure learned at Salesforce. And I'm glad I've had those kind of big company, small company experiences, but learning out of necessity and having to build something, and also having visibility. I also find, especially young people, they want visibility into how the business runs, right? Like part of the joy and the benefit of joining a startup is you can see everything. You can see pricing and marketing and product and security and the executive team. And you won't have that kind of visibility. I'm not saying Salesforce, but you work at a bigger company, you're working on your piece of the pie, which is good if that's what you want to do. I find that most of the folks that I work with in the startup community, and you're all here because you're extensively part of that, is they want to get insight into how the business is run because it makes them feel richer. A lot of them want to start their own businesses one day and they want to get that exposure. So if I had to do it all again, I would absolutely join a startup.
Paul, same question.
So I think for me, the answer is both. And I think it comes at different times. For me, would I do things differently? No, I would play things out exactly the way they played out for me. But I think it also depends on the individual and their comfort level, right? In a startup, a growth company, there is change every single day. And you have to be comfortable with that. Or you have to learn to be comfortable with that. The way we do things today is not the way that we're going to do things tomorrow, and certainly not the way we're going to do it next week. And so if you're not comfortable with that level of change, then the startup environment is not right for you. But at the same time, exactly to David's point around the exposure to things, right? I kind of fell into my first startup right out of school. It's not what I intended to get into, but I got a taste of that drug, and it was something that I wanted to continue to get more of. And then I had a bad trip, where I went down the path with a startup and it didn't go so well, but it was all learning, and I felt better for it. But but then I also grew weary of, I wanted to build my career as a sales professional, and I felt like the companies I was working with were holding me back, and I felt like I wanted to go work for a market leader to see whether again to my earlier point, I could be successful in a bigger company, and I wanted the ability to grow. So I took all that experience that I had from those first startups, applied it all to Salesforce, strong work ethic, and was able to go in and improve myself and work my way up. But then also, now wanting to come back and take all the things that I learned and apply it and get that reward. There's a lot of individual reps that see all the workings of what's happening, but then as a leader to see that all come together, it's very rewarding.
To add one more thing, the thing that I loved actually about my Salesforce experience now back in the startup world is when you're in a startup, depending on how big the startup is, you get to see things at a certain scale. And there are some startups out there that have user bases that are millions of people, and so you get to see a certain amount of things at scale. But the great thing about Salesforce is that you get to see so many things at scale. You get to see how a comp plan gets rolled out and adopted across a large scale. You get to see how ebbs and flows in pipe generation, and when reps close deals in the month. You get to see trends around discounting methodology and kind of hiring and progression that you just by the sheer size that you don't get to see at a bigger company. And so I found that kind of having had the Salesforce experience, now coming back to a smaller company, you're able to make decisions quicker because you can see kind of where it's going. I mean, in general, you don't want to make unilateral things, but when it comes to, like, for example, comp plans and pipe generation, like, you have just these insights knowing that, okay, across, if I had a 3,000 rep organization, here's kind of how it would look. So while you have a small data set with your group of 10 or 20 or 30 reps, you have a lot more confidence in the decision.
How would someone go about learning those things if they go down the path of a startup?
That's a good question. I mean, I think part of it is just getting exposure to things like this, right? Like you're here now, and you're hopefully listening to us, and you're picking up some insights. That's what this is all about. Kind of plugging yourself into the matrix, so to speak. Also networking, with other people that are kind of like you. I mean, one of the things that Paul and I do now that we've left Salesforce is we kind of have this VP of Sales support group that we participate in. Because
VPAA.
That's right. Yeah, we're recovering. But no, because the reality is at Salesforce you have lots of, for lack of a better term, grown-ups to speak to. There's like a million other people that do your job. And you can share insights across different business units, and that's really awesome. And now, when you're in a smaller company, you're like the Lone Ranger, and maybe you have your leadership team and maybe your executive team to help you, but you don't have that same network. And so one of the things that we do to kind of spot those trends is connect after the fact. Like, what are you seeing? What tools are you using? And I don't know, I found that support group really helpful.
I think the other thing, though, is when you're within a company, is be curious, right? Be curious and understand, like, hey, why are we doing things this way? What have we thought about doing it another way? But also, try and solve problems, right? I mean, I think if anybody's worked in a growth company or startup company, there's no shortage of problems. I mean, there are problems, as long as the day is long. And if you can help solve some of those problems, like you're contributing to the company, but you're also learning, right? Because you're showing that initiative, you have that curiosity, and you're making the company better.
Oftentimes, VPs of sales are the ones that are solving those problems, whereas the reps are, doing their jobs. They're on the phone, they're on the computer. Part one, can you give us some more insight into what your day looks like? And two, how do you encourage reps to actually take initiative and step out of their day-to-day routines and try to solve some of those problems? Because whose time are they going to solve them on, right? Are they going to spend an hour here? Are they going to spend an hour there? And how do you encourage reps to really break out of their comfort zone and start contributing to some of the things that you're thinking about and not necessarily just hitting their numbers? So we'll start with Paul because he's the one that brought it up.
So I would say, I think the first thing is be approachable. We at TouchBistro, we have kind of an environment that looks like this. There are no, offices for very few, right? I'm on the floor with everybody when I'm at my desk, and be approachable. So I would encourage the conversations all the time with people who have got, ideas and feedback and what have you. Sometimes I have to be, solicit it more, but
How, I just want to pause there. How detailed are the ideas? Because oftentimes, what we're afraid of is, well, if you don't come with me with a fully thought out idea on how to solve this specific problem, don't contribute your idea. So how does someone come to you with an actual idea where it's just in their mind, it's something they've thought of, but they haven't really solved the problem yet?
Yeah, so I think it's, approach with the high level, like, hey, I see that we have this problem, here is something that we might be able to do to solve it. And then they're looking for that initial validation, and then it's permission to go out and further explore and solve for it, while not taking too much time away from what they're doing every day to make sure that they're hitting the numbers and everything else. But it's those leadership leadership opportunities that are not by title. It's their wanting to go and solve something, make it better.
Yeah, so we did some Sandler training. If you guys haven't done Sandler training, we do a lot of Sandler training. We did a lot of it at Salesforce, and so we did it last week. So this is all very kind of fresh in my mind. But this idea that when we connect with customers, whose problems, whose timeline do they care more about, like us or theirs, right? They care about their stuff way more than they care about us. And that's actually one of the lessons that we try to drill into reps. I did a lot of it at Salesforce and continue to, which is customers don't give a shit about you. Like, unless you're Oprah or like Obama, like no one cares what you have to say. They only care about solving their problems. So the more customer-centric you can be, the better off you're going to be. And it's actually not dissimilar as a rep who is joining a company. What is it that you want? You want to make money, hopefully. You want to kind of grow and learn. And so you're always looking at your job with that lens in mind. Like, certainly you want the company to be successful, and when the company's successful, we all share in that success, but you want to be successful as an individual. And so our job as sales leaders, to a great extent, is to help you be successful on an individual level. And so one of the things I do is I push a lot of learning. My team knows at Influitive, we push a lot of learning. I love to learn, and so I push a lot of learning on my team, right? I want you to be better. At the end of the day, whatever happens with the company, or we all cross the finish line, whenever that finish line is, we all want to be smarter. We're going to be the same people. It's going to be the same people at the finish line, but we're all going to be a lot smarter than we were before. So pushing a lot of that learning. And then the second thing is clearing the obstacles, right? So a tactic that I love to do is, go to the reps and you ask them to complete this sentence. Like, I could sell more software if, and just listen. What's the if? Right? You can actually ask that to any department in your company, and you can ask it on any time horizon. So you could say, I could sell more software this week if, or I could have a better month end if, or I could market better if, or I could service more customers, whatever that if is, and try to figure out. And your job as a sales leader is to figure out, like, what are you hearing from your team? What are like the ifs that you can actually act on? And can being the operative word, because you can't do everything. You can influence some things, but there's certain things that you actually can do yourself. So what's one thing you can do? Focus on those things and look at things at scale. So part of what I'm trying to do is put processes and knowledge in place that will allow the team to go faster and have everyone go faster. And if we can all do that, that means they're going to learn more. Means they're going to hit their numbers to a more consistent basis and make money. So you have to you push the learning, listen, and try to do things at scale.
What constitutes learning? Is it on the job learning, you sitting at their desk listening to their calls? Is it the books sitting on the side of your desk? Is it the Sandler trainings? It's probably a combination of all of those, but where do you find when you place emphasis as a direct impact on reps' numbers or their engagement at work?
I mean, it's a combination of things. So I have favorite books, and I push a lot of books. You think I get like commission from selling, which I do not, but I push a lot of books because I love the learning. But it's a hybrid. We made a big investment in training last week, and we do all that classroom back end stuff. And okay, now let's go into the real world and try it out. All right, like every day. And so one of the things I actually do at my team meeting. So it's funny, back at Salesforce, this is one of the luxuries of the small company. I only had an all hands team meeting, so all my direct reports once a month for 30 minutes. It was weird because we had people in different cities and so on. And here at Influitive, I do it every week for 30 minutes, which I love. And so one of the things that we do is a kind of like a quiz session every week at the beginning of our weekly meeting to help drive that learning and accountability. We also share it, so I'll say that things like, okay, customer comes at you with this objection. All right, Paul, what would you say, right? And we kind of do some rapid fire. Or we have a little segment called, like, what are you doing differently? So like, what have you learned since last week that you put into practice? So it's a balance between, like, what are you learning, classroom style on the job, and what are you actually putting into practice? And the key is sharing those learnings across the team and promoting those positive behaviors. The more those positive behaviors become visible, the more repeatable they'll be in your team.
Paul, I want to ask you a specific question around that topic. You've grown the team significantly in the last year and a half. You've probably identified patterns or trends that tend to make people successful in the role, and specific things that reps don't do that kind of lead to their demise. So what have you found over the last year and a half that contributes to a rep being successful at TouchBistro?
So I think there's not one single easy answer to that. So I think it's partially environment. I think that we want to create an environment for our sales team that is empowering, right? When we talk about the learning, where they feel like they're coming into an environment where they're going to give it everything they've got, and they feel like they're going to walk out of there with some cash in their pocket and some knowledge. I think we all know, today, my dad worked at one company 27 years, out of school, retired. Like, that's not today's world anymore. And so I want people to feel like they are going to learn a lot at TouchBistro, but they're not going to be there forever. And then when they leave, they feel like they can look back and say, geez, I learned a lot there. And it's a big thing. So I think it's culture. We want a culture of learning. We want a culture of sales success. And I think when we have that, people will come to it. And so the people that we hire are ones that kind of embody all of that. Constant learners, very competitive people. They have a track record of successes in their past, and we want to continue to build on that. People that aren't afraid of obstacles, because we hit obstacles literally every single day, and we can't have people putting down their computer and walking out because we hit an obstacle. We got to find a way around it. And so we try and enable that. But yeah, so it's people and it's culture.
Oftentimes I find that where sales teams can mess up is particularly around going from when you started to where you are now, because that's a huge hurdle to come across. So, what were some of the steps you took to facilitate that type of culture, right? Because as far as I'm concerned, that culture didn't exist when you joined TouchBistro. So what was the focus of what you brought to TouchBistro that allowed you guys to thrive and create a sales culture like that?
I think one of the big ones, and I'll look for validation from the team, but I think one of the big ones was comp plan. We had a ass backwards comp plan when I started, and it took me way too long to change it. It was the right comp plan at the right time for the organization, but the organization quickly outgrew what was the intention of that comp plan. And so putting in a comp plan really reinforced that we are a sales-focused culture. We are a sales-focused organization. We're going to compensate our reps, accordingly. So that was a big part of it.
Let's jump into success at a startup. David, you recently wrote a post around why new reps fail. I want you to elaborate on that. What was the impetus behind writing that post? And can you just elaborate on some of the key points from that post?
Yeah, so at Salesforce, I ran the sales team that was the step above the BDR team. So I got a lot of BDRs promoted into my group. And so I would do a lot of kind of interviews with BDRs, like, hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time? I'm interested in a role at one point in your team. And I just kind of want to know, like, what should I be focused on? Like, what should I be thinking about to be successful? So I ended up having this conversation a lot. And when I end up having the same conversation over and over again, I write an article. So now it's crystallized and I can point people to it. But there's some nuance to it, right? Like people were asking in terms of like, what books can I read? Should I get really good at forecasting? Should I learn the pitch really well? And the reality is there's things that are on them to do, like some of those things. And there's things that are on us as the organization and sales leaders. So, for them, one of the things that, I would say to focus on is like figure out how you're going to add value. Right, like you can get calls with people, right? Anyone can get a call with someone, but they're going to want to take a second call with you. Like, how are you adding value to that person? Right, so figure out how you're going to add value on an ongoing basis. Things like getting into territory. It was a small thing, but when I took on my teams at Salesforce, I had one-on-ones with all the reps, and I said, like, what's one thing you would tell yourself, your 6 months ago self, your 9 month ago self, on day one to help you get a better start? And the number one thing was getting into territory and meeting my customers in person. Right? Something magical happens. So like those are things that a rep can do on their own, but there's things from an organizational perspective that we need to do as well. So one is coaching. Right? Like we have to commit to provide our sales reps with really good and effective sales coaching. I'm not going to get into that. There's a whole lot of nuance wrapped up in like what is good coaching, but coaching is really, really important. And the other thing, which is kind of funny, which I definitely see a lot now, is they need to see what good looks like. And I'll give you an example. So I saw this at Salesforce. So Salesforce, people are Salesforce customers here. So Salesforce, maybe it was like a year ago, we had a price change. Like Salesforce raised their prices. It was the first time in 16 years that we raised prices. And
right when I left.
That's right, yes. So we said, okay, great. So we're raising prices. And now there's never been a better time to go back to your customers and get them to buy now. Because like prices are going up. And like this is totally legit. First time in 16 years, like you're going to want to do it. And what we found was like reps ran face first into like a buzzsaw with customers because when you have this price increase in the back of your head, you start to exemplify some of the behaviors associated with schlocky or pushier salespeople. Like, oh, the price is going up. Now's never been a better time to buy. And we could have avoided that. We're like, oh, you know what? Like we could have avoided that by showing them what a good price increase conversation looks like. Right? Or like what a good sales pitch looks like, or what running a good executive dinner looks like. And all too often, we assume that people know what good looks like, and we say, oh yeah, price increase, go and run with that. Or like, you should totally do an executive dinner. Or even getting into territory, you should get in front of your customers more often. And what I would find, and I would accompany some of these reps on their first calls with customers on site, is that they would get in front of the customer and have this very polite conversation. There was like some mild interrogation that happened, and they would like come out of the meeting like, that was awesome. Like we actually didn't move the ball forward in any way. We just had a polite conversation with the customer. because we didn't really set expectations for what a good customer meeting looks like. And I think it's on us, not just as managers. When you could be like an amazing sales rep, you come into a new organization, you may not know what good looks like in that environment. So it's to the question, Kenny, I mean, there's certain things that as a rep you need to do, and then there's certain things as the organization we're responsible for doing.
Read the post online for more details.
Yes, unquotable.
We have some Twitter questions, so let's open the Twitter stream up and ask those questions. This is the first time we're doing this, so give us your feedback. Let us know what you think. The first question, do you want to just ask from there?
I'll read it.
Here you go.
Both David and Paul. How do you promote your reps into leadership roles on your team, and is it always the rep who sells the most?
So I have three people at our team that in my time we've moved into management positions. And the short answer is no. It's not always the person who sells the most. We have one example of the person who sold the most that was in that position, but I think it's the person that exemplifies, what we need to be done. I think there's lots of examples of the best sales rep becomes the worst manager, and I think you've got to look at all of the other characteristics of great leaders, and kind of make that well-rounded decision.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of think of it as, let's say you were in high school and you're trying to get into like a special program in a university. If you have straight A pluses, then you'll get in, right? Like, it doesn't really matter too much what else you got going on. You're probably going to get in. But most students don't have that, right? Like, when you think about sales reps, it would be great if there was a rep that was hitting their quota every single month. Like, those reps are very hard to find. But it's usually a balance, right? It's usually a balance between attainment and emotional intelligence and rigor and coaching ability. So I would agree with Paul. There's a spectrum that you look for when you're looking to promote someone.
And awesome. One more question from Liz. You mentioned the books on your desk. What's the best book that you have that you recommend to all your reps, Dave?
Top two.
Top two.
Oh, I was going to go for 3. Everything's in 3s.
You may proceed.
I can proceed with 3? Okay, good. Okay. So the 3 standard issue books on my desk. One is called The One Thing. It's probably the book I've known most for pushing on people. It was out a couple years ago. It's all about how to achieve extraordinary results with focus and prioritization. I call it kind of like the go into the gym book. I use the gym analogy throughout my entire sales career. Go to the gym, easy to say, let's go to the gym. Hard to do. People don't go to the gym, right? And so focus is one of those things. It's easy to say, oh, let's not multitask and let's focus and prioritize. Like, people don't do it, right? But when you look at how the most successful people prioritize and focus, it's really awesome. And so it's called The One Thing. There's lots of data in that book, so I love The One Thing. The second one is called Yes, 50 Scientifically Proven Ways to Be Persuasive. It's by Cialdini, who wrote Influence. It's 50 short chapters. It was actually given to me by an investor in our last startup. And it was kind of the thing that helped me see the world of sales like the vacuum cleaner, right? All of these like little trends and patterns that you actually don't necessarily pick up on, like how waiters who actually repeat their patrons' orders back to them verbatim get higher tips because it shows, consistency. Anyway, so that's number 2, yes. And then the third book is called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. Were you going to steal that? What? It's a good book, yeah. It's a bad title. But it's basically, if you're looking for a book on Sandler sales training, Sandler's proprietary, so the words and terms, like you can't just write a book on it. But if you're looking for a book that is Sandler sales training in a book using different words, it's called Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. So those are my 3. So
between the two of us, we'll have 4. So I would echo Let's Get Real or Let's Not Play. I think, it's a lot about disqualification and then requalification, which is really important. Like for our sales team, we're very inbound focused, and so we need to have more value on our time, and so either the deals have got to be real or we're not engaging. But even when you're an outbound sales organization where it's about qualification, it's once you got a qualified deal, then it's about making sure that it's qualified. But I think the other one that's really relevant in today's selling environment is the challenger sale. And kind of pushing the boundaries or pushing the way in which we're engaging with customers today. A lot of the decision making for customers is already a lot further down the pipeline than before when salespeople get engaged. And kind of having the customer rethink kind of their ideal state is important, and having the tact to do it correctly.
A bit of a rant on that. Oftentimes, what we see are salespeople quickly just blurting out features or benefits, or specifically talking about what they can provide to the customer. Oftentimes, sales team, or especially salespeople, are notorious for not looking at it from the customer's perspective, or even taking it a step further and looking at it from the customer perspective. How do you guys step out of the tech bubble, your offices, your four walls, and look at it from your customer's customer perspective? Start with David, and we'll go to Paul.
This is perhaps the most important thing we've talked about tonight, quite honestly, and the easiest in a lot of ways. Oftentimes in sales, we kind of have this persona. That's different than how we are in our normal everyday lives. Some people have it, and some people are, kind of the same. Think about if you were on the receiving end. So I'll give you this example. It's funny. So I was at SaaStr. You were at SaaStr. I saw Kenny there. And so David Skock, who's an investor, Matrix Partners, big HubSpot is their big claim to fame. He says, who here on their team has BDRs, part of their sales organization? Everyone's putting their hand up. And he says, we love our BDRs. They make the calls. They bring in the leads. We love our BDRs. Okay, who here loves getting calls from someone else's BDRs? Right? Like, silence. I'm actually a very hard guy to get a hold of when it comes to BDRs. I don't know about you, Paul. Like, I get prospected 10 times a day with the same bullshit, stupid email. And I'm gonna write an article just so I can send a link to that article to these people and say, like, stop doing that. But I wonder, when these people write these notes and these emails and use these tactics, if they were to just stop and ask themselves, if they got that email or that outreach or that phone call as the consumer, what would they do? Would they be like, oh, I'm long distance savings, where can I sign up? Like, this is amazing, right? Like, so the point is that you have to think like your customer. When sales reps come to me, let's say we had a meeting, or they say, look, we're trying to get into this particular account. I want to prospect into this VP of sales. And they say, this is the note I'm going to send. What do you think? The first question I ask them is like, I don't know, what do you think? Would you respond to this? If the answer is no, then you got to go back and fix it. Right? So, like, always thinking, it's so easy to do. And for whatever reason, I don't know why in sales, we think that, like, people are automatically going to respond to us because we're salespeople and we have this magic power, right? Like, they are just like you. They are just like me. It's actually one of the reasons, not pitching here, one of the reasons why I got into Influitive is because I believe that the future of sales is not bothering people until they buy something from us. And so when you think about your interaction as a consumer, think about how you want to be treated and get your team to act thusly to their prospect. That's the easiest way I can explain it.
I think, just want to caveat what you're going to say, Paul. I think it's interesting given your specific industry, because you could theoretically walk up to anyone here and they'd be your customer's customer. So I'm curious to hear if you have a different stance than David, or you agree with everything that he said, or you kind of slightly modify it given the hospitality industry.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a whole bunch of things to pivot on there. I'll pick one and kind of center around it. So one thing I would say is that our customers are barely businesses. So it's almost like we're selling to consumers, and our customer is again not extremely sophisticated in some cases. Some of them are absolutely.
Who are your typical customers?
So independent restaurant owners, the alternative cafe, or whatever number of restaurants even right in this area, and some of them are big hospitality groups, and they understand the value of the solution, but we had a challenge of people responding to us when they reached out to us initially, and so that was kind of like a real kind of eye-opener for us. Is like, somebody reached out to us, we responded back, and they never responded again, and so, like, what are we saying here that would drive that? And so our sales team in the last 12 months has gone through a big pivot toward value-based selling. We were very feature functionality. It's like, you like bill splitting, this is the way you split bills. And it was also driven based on who our buyer was at the time, right? Very early in the product life cycle, right? Mobile point of sales are not everywhere yet. And so you would get an owner who really liked the concept of bill splitting and making it really easy and being able to swipe and drag and what have you. And they were enamored with this great feature. But then, they all bought. And now we're left with a whole bunch of people that are like, so sell this thing to me. Why would I want to buy a mobile point of sale for my business? And we struggled for a little while to understand that. And so, when we really started kind of digging in and understanding, why would a restaurant owner be interested in a mobile point of sale, and why would they be interested in taking the tablet to the table? And so when we started to refine that talk track, we saw a significant difference in our engagements.
Was that getting outside of the office and going downstairs and talking to Alternative Cafe and talking to the restaurants that are in the area?
Yeah, so I think it's leveraging our restaurant experience, talking to the customers directly, and when you would go out and talk with them and give them the value proposition and kind of seeing their reaction. But also, a lot of what we do is over the phone, and so, we don't have all these great productivity tools where we can listen in on conversations. Just kind of sit beside a rep and listen to one side of the conversation and say like, okay, what is the person on the other side saying? But you get a good sense of, there was one time it was in our office in New York, and I was sitting beside a rep, and we'd been past the lead, and this person presumably was interested in buying him, but he wanted to be sold. And the rep kept asking him, was like, what do you want me to show you? What feature do you want me to show you? And the guy was like, show me something of value here. And it was a standoff between my sales rep and the prospect, because we weren't engaged on the value side of it. We do a way better job of that today, and that's what's going to propel us to the next level.
Is that a function of being there on the ground floor working with your reps? Is that specific trainings that you brought into place? Is that a lot from what you learned at Salesforce? Where did that come from?
I think it starts with common sense, to be fair. I think it's just like looking at, to David's point, like, would you be interested in buying this? Like, would you respond to this email? Would you respond to this voicemail? So I think that's the root of where it starts, and then it's really understanding, okay, now who is the buyer? What is their mindset? What's the most important thing to them? And then when you really start to uncover, the personas of the people that you're talking to and what's important to them, and making sure that the message that we're delivering is relevant to them. And so, we distill it down to 3 value propositions that's going to hit on 99.9% of the restaurant owners.
Okay, let's move on to quick rapid fire questions. Bit on the future of sales, bit on the future of sales tech. Obviously, you live this to some extent, David. First and foremost, what does your sales stack look like at Influitive?
There's a lot of stuff. We use a lot of stuff. I was actually shocked when I first joined Influitive how much we use. So, so we use Salesforce, we use Gong, we use Insight Squared, we use Yesware, we use Zoom, we use, did I say SalesLoft? SalesLoft. We use, what else do we use, Josh?
Yesware and SalesLoft?
Yesware, yeah, we use Yesware, SalesLoft, Insight Squared, Zoom. We use DocuSign. What's that? Viewed it from Vid. Yeah, we use Vidyard and Viewed it from Vidyard. We have no shortage of sales technology at Influitive.
Let's remove Salesforce out of the equation. What do you think is the one that's had the most impact on your sales teams?
So it's interesting. So we had this conversation before we got here, and it depends who you ask. If you ask me, and this is kind of, I've kind of come full circle on this. I really like Insight Squared, and I don't know why I hate to say that. It's not inexpensive, but I find that Insight Squared is an analytics platform that can sit on top of Salesforce that will just give you insights. Part of what was really powerful, and I learned at Salesforce, is that some of the people at Salesforce, like a guy like Paul, he could like sit there and look at Salesforce data and see it like the Matrix, because there's so many different levers, right? And figure out based on looking at that data what was going on. And I find that Insight Squared actually does that for me. Like it'll serve up a whole lot of insight. So if you're looking at, for example, pipeline that's pushed, so you can say like, show me what our pipeline looked like last week? Show me what it looks like now, and where did all that pipeline move to? Was it pushed? Was it lost? What month did it go to? Who pushed the most? And so Insight Squared just makes it easy to get those kind of insights, which when you're trying to like run a sales organization, like those like microscopic insights are actually really, really powerful.
You don't use Zoom, you don't use SalesLoft, you don't use Yesware, Gong maybe, but I mean that's the only one that's really relevant to you day to day.
Yeah, I mean to the reps, I mean Yesware is huge. I mean if I was a new rep and I was trying to ramp up, like Gong would be massive, being able to listen to calls and have it analyzed. I know we're talking about a lot of these things. Maybe not everyone knows what all these packages do, but being able to, I think just kind of high level, it's like eyes on your business. Eyes in your business that can see things that you don't. So little things like Gong where it can like record a call and it will tell you how much you're talking versus the client and like what you're talking about where and when in the call. It's actually really insightful to be able to see. It's kind of like if you're like a sports coach and you're trying to coach someone on their swing. You know, they can't see it, they're the one swinging, but you're the one who's kind of looking at it, and to the extent that you can actually dissect the swing and figure out what you can do to make it better, you can help that player be better. And I find a lot of sales technologies, I mean, there's different flavors, but those are the most powerful ones in my opinion.
Paul?
This is going to be really short. So we have telephones, and yeah, that's about it. So we don't have a lot of productivity tools yet. And so, you know, there is definitely an opportunity for us to invest in some, but we do use, I joke a little bit, we do use Yesware. We do use, obviously, Salesforce. There is a tool, so I'm assuming you're going to ask me the question about the one that we can't live without. We haven't actually bought it yet. So we definitely cannot live without telephones. But the tool that we've been using for 6 months, thanks to a great little startup that really wants our business, and that we should be buying today or tomorrow is a product called TextUs. And so again, our customer is almost a consumer, and so when they reach out to us, it's their mobile phone, and so this tool will allow us to text with them, and so almost 40% of our conversations are via text. And this allows us to load that information into Salesforce. It allows us to detect whether it's a SMS-enabled phone. It allows us to mass text. It allows us to send template texts. But it's basically like an email tool that we use 40% of the time.
I think it's pretty cool. Do not get that. You're going to send texts. Let's jump into common misconceptions. So, a lot of people jump into a sales organization, specifically startups. What do you find are the most common misconceptions that either a sales leader can have or a rep can have when joining a startup? Start with you, David.
That it's going to be easy. I don't know why people think that. I think that, it used to be, so it's funny. So back when I was a science student in university, I only took 2 arts courses in my whole university career, and one of them was on popular culture. And as part of that, I was just this person, I wanted to make fun of art students, so I did this little survey on science, and I wanted to see what people were going to answer. And I asked questions like, how fast do you think the space shuttle flies, and how long ago, one of the questions was, how long ago do you think dinosaurs roamed the earth? And I had different, 10,000 years, 10 million years, 50 million years. And what I found was that, in general, people picked a number that was way closer to the current era than in actual fact. It's about 65, the answer is 65 million years, and most people were picking 10,000 years, right? Or some smaller number. And the reason at that time, this is the mid-90s, was because movies like Jurassic Park came out and it made it seem like, dinosaurs were not that far away, right? And so I actually found it's not dissimilar with startups. At our last startup, I did a lot of recruiting, and I found that a lot of people wanted to join the startup because they thought that a startup was like a small company but cooler, right? That sounds, I want to join a small company, but I want to join a cool small company, so this sounds like a good idea. When, those of you who are in startups know that it's insane. It's insane, every day in the bear pit insanity, right? And you have to want that, and if you want that, you're going to do really well. And if you don't want that, you're not going to be very happy. But I actually feel it's worse today. It was interesting, one of the guys on my team was showing me an infographic that showed that in 2011, there were, I think, about 175 technology companies in marketing tech. And this year, there's 5,000. And so what that means is that this idea of a startup in shows like Silicon Valley makes startups seem like the recency effect of the dinosaurs. Like, oh, startups are awesome and they're all over the place and it looks like a lot of fun. And people join startups and they think that it's not that it's going to be easy, but everything's always going to be up and to the right. And the reality is like it's a slog every day. There's ups and downs. And even, people who've been through acquisitions, and we got acquired by Salesforce, if you ask me how we did it, it's just like a whole lot of mistakes. And a couple things you did right, and a little bit of the right place, right time, and it's very, it's difficult to just replicate that, right? Like it's in a lot of cases it's a perfect storm, and so that's the number one thing. Like people think it's going to be easy, and it's not. But there's the reward for the difficult and the challenges is that you are better at the end of the day. You are better, you are smarter, you are well equipped to take on the next challenge, even if that venture was not successful. Most of them aren't, right? So it's not easy.
Oh,
So I would think, first of all, I absolutely agree that that it's with David's point that they're hard, but I also think though that you hear we're doing a lot of interviewing, and a lot of reasons that people wanted to leave their existing companies is because there's nothing more for them to learn, there's nothing more for them to do, and I would say that that's just not the case in a startup. I think that there's always lots to learn and lots to do, and it may be outside of your job description, and you may have to reach a little bit further in order to find those learning opportunities. But I credit a lot of my success in having the ability to get into a company like Salesforce as an individual contributor is because I worked for a small startup. And I embraced every opportunity to take and learn something, and challenge what we were doing, and dare us to do something different, and not in a way that it's insubordination or what have you, but just coming up with ideas on how we can do it, and kind of have that kind of will to survive. I remember telling our CEO at the time, who happens to be the same CEO today, but that if this thing ever went south, that we'd be selling software to the back of his car, and you have to have that kind of determination, I think, in order to make it. But there's lots to learn, and you just got to be open to taking on new challenges.
2 quick questions and 2 quick answers following that, and then we'll go to the audience. Selling to Canadians versus Americans. Both of you sell. Paul, you've recently kind of opened up in the States. What are your thoughts on that? Is there a difference? Is there no difference? David, we'll start with you.
Yep, there's a big difference. Sell to Americans. That's my advice.
Elaborate quickly.
Would you like to know more than that? Oh my gosh. Yeah, I mean, look, it's when you see kind of pockets of cavalierness and adoption and willingness to try new things, and it's different. Like Australia is different than the UK, different than Canada versus the US. Most organizations, most sales organizations, software companies up here will still charge in US dollars. Americans, the addressable market's just bigger. They're quicker to adopt, quicker to make decisions. I remember back in the early days of Ripple too, when Canadians have more questions and concerns around privacy. Not that they're any less privacy conscious than Americans, but they have questions about the American privacy laws that you're trying to comply with, and why don't you comply with the Canadian ones? That's why it was a big deal for Salesforce to get a data center up in Canada, because firewall rules was a big deal. So for the sake of simplicity, addressable market, kind of the mindset, out of the 4 startups that I've been a part of, and they've all been headquartered here in Toronto. We primarily sold to the U.S. as our first market. I mean, we didn't, not to the exclusion of Canadians, but it just made business sense to focus on the U.S.
Paul?
Same. Focus on the U.S., much bigger market. For us, it's actually a little bit interesting because the U.S. market is way more competitive, way more competitive than in Canada. I think Canadians will buy based on relationship, and they'll stay with you longer. They have more of a tolerance for that, whereas Americans are very flighty, and they'll make quick decisions to go with you, but they'll also make quick decisions to leave you. But the market is way bigger the dollar advantage right now for us is really big. So, you know, we're pushing as much as we can into the US and the rest of the world for that matter.
Calls. Do you want reps to have calls at their desks? Do you want reps to have calls in their meeting rooms? I've heard either or. Oftentimes, just to elaborate for folks, if you have calls in meeting rooms, reps can either be intimidated or scared to have calls on the sales floor. Other reps can't learn and hear from those reps having those calls. And alternatively, if you have calls in meeting rooms, you're not disturbing the peace. So, you know, what's your approach on that?
Yeah, I like calls out in the open. I think it's great for people to hear each other. I know it's sometimes sensitive because you're always wondering, oh, am I doing this well? Like, are people listening? And it was interesting at Salesforce, what we found, because we had offices obviously kind of all over the US and Canada, that the reps in Toronto were much more likely to make phone calls, in Chicago the same thing, New York the same thing, in kind of the pit, versus San Francisco, where they were on the same floor with all the executives and they were a little bit more concerned about, you know, what people would think. But yeah, I mean, there's tons of learning that can happen when you're just hearing calls incidentally from your colleagues. And also it's so much easier to coach. You know, like you might be able to pick up something on a phone conversation, or someone can just kind of put the customer on mute and ask you something really quickly. So, you know, if you can kind of get over your fear of, you know, performing in front of other people, there's a ton of value. And it also creates just a lot of buzz. You know, like when there's a lot of buzz and action happening on the floor, it's energizing, and people love that. At the same time, the only thing you just need to be conscious of is the customer experience, which is really, that's the most important thing. If you're speaking in an area that is loud and it's very difficult to hear, and you certainly don't want to do that, but there's ways that you can architect your calling environment to minimize that kind of disruption.
I remember the first day that I started at Salesforce, and I was in this open environment, and I had to make my first phone calls. And I remember trying to be down underneath my desk and talking as quiet as I could because I didn't want people to hear what I was saying. But it was, as David kind of mentioned, that's the culture. That's the culture at Salesforce, and it was this continuous learning. And so I, grew more confident with my conversation, and I grew more confident in having open conversations. And it's amazing when you have that open conversation how much feedback you're going to get. I love the open conversation. We don't have a choice really at TouchBistro. There's not a lot of meeting rooms where reps do it, but reps don't do it. I mean, they want that, that conversation because they want to be able to roll back their chair and ask the question. It's like, hey, how do we do taxes for this? Or, how can we do modifiers in this situation? And, other reps are, ready, willing, and able to help answer that question. And it's also a great opportunity to kind of, celebrate great calls, right? Again, you're only hearing half the conversation, but say, hey, I love the way you handled that, objection. I love the way you ask for confirmation before you're moving on to the next step. So it's a great opportunity to celebrate as well.
You've worked side by side at Salesforce. David, what do you think Paul's world class at?
Oh, so many things. He's a sharp dresser. He's a great coach. But no, I mean, one of the things I admired most about Paul was that he was able to see the world of Salesforce and all of the richness of the data and the trends like the Matrix, right? So he was able to year after year pick up on trends and patterns and coach his team and kind of move them towards the behaviors that he knew were going to produce the best results. It's actually very hard. This is something if anyone's in sales leadership or you get into it, it's actually very hard to look at a big data set and figure out what the hell is going on, right? There's so many different variables. You're trying to figure out like what to measure and what's going to move the needle. And I found that Paul was always very good at looking at those various data sets and saying, no, here's where I'm focusing on with my team. Here's where I'm focusing on with enablement because this is what's going to move the needle the most. And it's a really, really key but hard skill to learn.
Paul, what can David do better?
What can David do better?
I'm joking. What's he world class at? What do you think he does extremely well within his settings?
So I think obviously David's intellect. Very, very, very smart guy. And what I learned a lot from David was kind of the breakdown of the psychology of the sales rep, and really helping to understand kind of not from the motivation standpoint, but just ways to approach. Right, and I think one of the early conversations we had was around the belief system. Right, I believe in helping the reps to really understand what they believe and what their customers should be believing, and really focusing on the people side of the business. It's where he came from before joining Salesforce, so he had a lot of subject matter expertise in that area, but applying all of that to the data part of what I was doing and creating some really world-class reps out of it.
Great. So just want to thank you too for coming down here and sharing some insights with us. We'll open the floor up to questions from the audience this time. So we'll start with you, and I'll have you guys David repeat the question.
So as a sales manager in a startup, do you guys have any tips for balancing spending time coaching, but also being really wrapped up in developing the process and documenting it, making sure it's improving, and sort of that time management aspect?
Yeah, so the question was around time management. How do you balance kind of going deep with a rep in a one-on-one coaching situation versus laying the foundation kind of across the team? Yeah, that's why you got to read the one thing. It's about but it is a balance. Like it is a balance. Like you need to spend time with the reps. The reps, in essence, are your customer, right? And so you need to know like what they care about, what's on their mind. Part of it is to help them get better. Part of it is to help them unlock what I call the discretionary effort. Like if you have the hearts and minds, if you're helping them get better, if they see that they are getting better and there's a ton of value in being part of your sales organization, then they will try harder, right, than they ordinarily would. So it's important to have that. At the same time, you can't let the processes go off the rails. If you're looking for like how, is it 50-50? Is it, 30-70? The reality is it varies from week to week. One of the things that I do now is I have regular one-on-one. So I have a sales manager who manages also a Salesforce guy who manages the direct sales reps. Then we have a BDR manager, sales enablement person, operations person, but I still have one-on-one meetings with everyone on the team on a regular basis to make sure that I still stay top of mind in terms of like what's important to them, at the same time laying the foundation. So it's a balance, but you do have to do both. You'll typically know when you've overcorrected, from week to week, one way or the other. Like, oh my gosh, okay, this week I got to spend a lot of time with the reps diving in and understanding. And it's also partially what's going on in the business. Are emotions riding high? Is it the end of the quarter? Is it the beginning of the quarter? Do we need a lot of training in this area? So it does ebb and flow. But that's part of the fun.
Just in the interest of time, anyone have a question for Paul? Any other questions?
Say I had my own startup and I wanted to, obviously I'm from Toronto, I want to build my team. I want to build my team in Toronto, for example, and I love home, and you want to be the best at home before you expand out. But what you were saying about the US is interesting. Would you suggest maybe to just forget about Canada and just focus on the US to start and then come back later? Is that a strategy? Or do you think you should focus on mastering your craft at home, have, that backing of the Canadian, I know there's a lot of government subsidies and things like that to help you out, but I was thinking about while you mentioned it, would that be a strategy to just attack the US full on and just forget about Canada?
I'm going to alter the question slightly, just saying specifically starting with the sales team. So not.
Yeah.
So I think it's really challenging to do what you just described. Having a remote sales team, we had two primary sales teams, one in Toronto, one in New York. And now we've added Austin and Chicago. And the New York sales team took about 2.5 years to get them up to speed. Very, very expensive to do that. But now we've got Austin and Chicago, and they're 60 days in, and they're already ahead of where New York was a year ago. So it can be a very, very expensive proposition. It's very difficult to learn from a distance. The learning you'll get by being in market with your reps in the streets in Toronto or wherever that is, if it's face to face or over the phone, you're going to learn a lot more, and it's a lot easier to establish your culture and then export your culture versus trying to go and create a foreign culture that doesn't necessarily translate back to Toronto.
Thank you. So round of applause for our panelists.